Okay, so hear me out. Whenever you log in, you're going to see this hole in the wall. I know that historically we've had really cool login screens with things such as dragons and flying and everything else and dark portals and whatnot. But hear me out. There's just going to be this hole in the wall. And is it going to do anything? Probably not. But it's cool, right? Right? Anyways, so this is the War Within loading screen. It was recently data mined on Wowhead. It might not be final, as stated here at the top, but this is presumably what the login screen is going to look like. However, there's a lot of other stuff that we have to actually talk about this week in what's going on with World of Warcraft. So a lot of it's actually beta-based. We did have an update to the M Plus situation that we talked about last weekend, where we had that interview with Morgan Day and Ina Hazakostas. There was a lot that was being talked about in regards to M Plus changes. We're going to be able to go through those. We also have Terrathal on and a little bit to talk about, just kind of how the new changes are feeling. On top of that, there's been some class changes, and ray testing for Nerebar Palace has been picking up. For class changes, Surf Hunter got a little bit of a change. Basically, Blizzard's talking about Survival Hunter feedback. One of our goals of Survival Hunter spec tree update was to better define the niche for each survival's tandem of pet hunter attacks. Basically, they actually tried to make the spec a lot more enjoyable, changing coordinated assault to be a more useful cooldown. They're also working with how flanking, strike, and just trying to make sure that how survival feels to play is fairly positive. I've heard good things about how it feels to play now in regards to how popular it is with the player base. Players have tended to not want to play survival too much since the rework, which is a bit unfortunate because I think that the class fantasy of the spec is actually quite cool, but it is what it is. On top of that, I'm not allowed to make fun of shamans anymore, which is unfortunate because major shaman changes to arrive next week's beta build. So shamans were one of the classes that I would say has received the least amount of attention across the entire state of the game for War Within Alpha and Beta. Basically only receiving one change in total so far, but now we've been working through a package of updates for shamans. Now we can confirm that we'll have the majority of the changes implemented and ready for testing in the next beta build next week. How large these changes are going to be is still up in the air. They could be as large as reworks. They could be as small as just, minor tweaks. Ellie also got a 30% damage buff this week too, which is actually kind of crazy to be thinking about. So yeah, so shamans are going to be finally getting changed, which is very good. On top of that, there's also been some other news. So avoidance and leech, basically straight across the board, are going to be nerfed. This goes in line with what Ian and Morgan were stating in the interview the other day, where whenever they were talking about defensive creep and healers, they did bring up avoidance and leech as particular problem points. And now basically everybody's passive nodes that gave them leech or avoidance gives them about half as much leech and avoidance. I suspect that it says in today's build, avoidance and leech rating on gear will also give half as much percent values before. And so then we're reducing the amount of stats these are given by most talents. So avoidance and leech in general are going to have, in theory, less impact, but now you could also argue that it's going to be more impactful that you have twice as much leech or avoidance on your gear, because leech and avoidance are still combat power for a tertiary. That's, in theory, not supposed to necessarily be combat power. Also, we also had the trading post coming out for July. After the day of recording this, we are going to have some of the trading post stuff popping up. You got this fish that looks like it's a N'Zoth fish. I don't know. I think that the trading post is really cool. I would definitely go and recommend just going and looking at what's available on the trading post after this is posted. So you can determine if you want to spend your tendies on anything that's super cool, but it is a swimming themed trading post. Beyond that, let's talk about Raid a little bit. So Nerebar Palace testing has ramped up a lot. Now Mythic is starting to be tested for Nerebar Palace, and I've heard a lot of positive feedback in regards to boss encounters and just general aesthetic of Nerebar Palace, where a lot of players are seeming to believe that the Raid is just designed really well. It has a lot of interesting fights, and it seems like the testing is going better than it has been in the past for a lot of other raids. We're testing for raids is a bit people could get a bit uppity sometimes about the testing, but in general, it seems like the Nerebar Palace testing has been very well received. Have the dates right here. So right now, this most recent weekend, there was mythic testing for Ulgarox, the Bloodbound Horror in Sikran, and they're going to continue to do more raid testing even this weekend, where they have starting Friday, June 28th, so yesterday at the time of recording this, going through Monday, you're going to be able to test through heroic or through normal. There's also going to be more mythic testing on July 10th, and through July 11th, there's going to be more mythic testing to where you're able to go and see the fights if you want. But they're kind of ramping up and finishing mythic testing. Now they are still not testing the last boss of the raid. I've seen some people kind of comment talking about how they would like, no bosses tested in the raid. I think that that's incredibly unlikely to happen, especially since they do actually need, I think, class data in regards to how much damage classes are doing. I think that they're going to need a lot more data. So I don't think that eliminating PTR testing of raid bosses is going to happen, but I think the fact that they're still no longer testing the final bosses of raid and being relatively successful with that is positive, because whenever the fights are new, whenever you've never seen them before, whenever you only have the dungeon journal to kind of go off of, that's kind of cool. I think that's a cooler situation than whenever you really know what you're getting into beforehand and everything's been so thoroughly tested and optimized. I think that it's a lot cooler whenever you see it for the first time. Yeah. Okay, so the final and probably the most important thing that we have to talk about is the affix system update. So let's just go through and read this, and then we'll catch up with Terathal and kind of get his thoughts as to what's actually changed with the affix system update. So affix update overview. We're reducing the total number of mechanical affixes on a keystone for players progressing through the system from 2 to 1. The following affixes are being retired for the War Within: Sanguine, Bolstering, Raging, and Bursting. We've also heard feedback that applying bonuses unevenly for players feels exclusionary, regardless of overall impact. Affixes that were part of the last Mythic Plus Keystone testing will no longer be applied to Keystones, and those are Reckless, Focused, Attuned, and Thorned. So the Kiss Curse affixes and the Legacy affixes that they were going to continue to bring are completely gone. And what they said with this is, previously we approached Mythic Plus Keystones with a one-size-fits-all approach, which proved challenging in striking the right balance in our design space. In this new build, you will see significant shifts in our design philosophy. We recognize the importance of weekly variety for those progressing through the system. However, for players pushing high keys, this variance has felt restrictive. We've also heard your feedback about wanting affixes to be both positive and negative effects, as well as a desire for thematic nods to similar past affixes. So, talking about how seasonal affixes were really cool, and you were seeing them in regards to I think thematically this made sense with the season, and it looks super sick. This update to the affix system aims to meet those diverse expectations. We are maintaining the core goal of our last round of changes, but with the limitations of a one-size-fits-all approach, this flexibility allows us to craft a more tailored experience for the different playstyles. And so they are going to be making sure that high-end key pushers, people who are just going to be doing M0s, people who are just doing weekly keys, everybody's going to have maybe a slightly different experience, but still be interacting with the system in a similar manner, right? We're utilizing passive affixes to signpost the expected increases in player mastery and commensurate rewards as players progress through the Mythic Plus Keystone system. We're also aiming to eliminate push weeks for providing a consistent challenge that merely focuses solely on the dungeon for players seeking to advance deeper in the Mythic Plus Keystone system for scores and titles. I will say that I think that they could add something that's in between. We're going to talk about exactly what they changed, but I do think that right now, basically, there's weekly keys, and then there's rank 1 title keys, and there's very little in between getting the rank 1 title and doing weekly keys. And I actually think that they added some reward structure, even if it's like something very simple, like cosmetics or something. I think that if they added something to the reward structure in between title keys and weekly keys, that would actually be kind of nice. I don't think it has to be something as serious as gear. I think it could be something, as simple as a Mog set, a recolor of a Mog set. It could be like a mount even. I don't think it necessarily has to be a mount, but it could be a recolor of a Mog set or a mount. And I think that adding those in between, what is the rank 1 title and weekly keys, I think that would be nice. Because at the end of the day, the portals are cool, but the portals aren't At some point there's like a large discrepancy between, oh, I got my portals and no, I'm going for the rank 1 title. And so I think that continuing to encourage players to push keys would be positive. All right, let's talk about the new affixes. First and foremost, we have Xal'atath's Bargain Ascendant and Xal'atath's Bargain Frenzied. At the Keystone level, +2, Xal'atath herself will manifest herself in dungeons, introducing a rotation of affixes under the banner of Xal'atath's Bargain. These affixes not only seek to empower the dungeon's denizens, but also grant players the opportunity to harness their effects. We will have 2 Xal'atath's Bargain affixes available. One affix is an event that players must deal with periodically, while the other affix is a passive effect on creatures throughout the dungeon. So for Ascendant, it reads, while in combat, Xal'atath rains down orbs of cosmic energy that attempt to empower nearby enemies, increasing their haste and movement speed. If players disrupt these orbs, they claim the effect for themselves. So this is virtually identical to how Raszageth orbs work, where these orbs will be rained down from Xal'atath, and then if you use any CC, purge, interrupt on them at all, then you'll be able to gain haste. And you gain 20 stacks of this haste buff. I think it equates to about 20% haste, and so it feels incredibly impactful, almost prideful levels of impactful, as to you're getting basically a lust in the middle of the dungeon. Now, the downside of this is obviously that you end up having to throw a decent amount of CC. You're not throwing just one CC ability at these. And so it can get a bit tricky at times if you have to throw multiple CC abilities to be able to get all of these Cosmic Ascension orbs killed off. But at the same point, this is mostly fine because these are aimed towards the average player. And these orbs, the way that they feel, I'm going to say is very good. We're going to be able to catch up with Terathal and kind of get his thoughts on it. But the Ascendant haste orbs and how you're able to claim the haste for yourself, this really does feel in line with like what the Kiss Curse affixes should be. For Xal'atath's Bargain Frenzied, non-boss enemies become frenzied at 30% health remaining, increasing their haste by 40%, but also increasing their damage taken by 20%. A 20% damage taken gain on mobs is actually very noticeable. Now, mob haste has a tendency to work in a couple of mysterious ways, especially with the ways that it will affect cooldowns on mob abilities and cast times and whatnot. But having played through Frenzy, I will say that I think that the 20%, again, this is like a cornerstone Kiss Curse design. And I think that the way that they went through and designed these Kiss Curse affixes, they also gave them very cool visuals to where, these look like seasonal level affixes, and they feel like seasonal level affixes whenever you're playing through them. And I think that Blizzard did a pretty good job whenever they were designing this. They're also changing level 7 affix. So starting at Keystone plus level 7, Challenger's Peril will directly affect the dungeon timer. This affix will emphasize precise play. And what the Challenger's Peril will do is it reduces 15 seconds off of your timer instead of the traditional 5 seconds off of your timer for deaths. This is a bit punitive, especially for deaths, but you've actually seen time and time again where some people are timing keys with 20 to 30 deaths. So I think that, kind of reducing that is positive. I do think that there could also be an argument made where it's too punitive, where you're already seeing some, I would say, more average players getting annoyed with the system as a whole and leaving after one wipe, even if the key is still timeable. And with it being up to 15 seconds from 5, you might see that more often where people are even more annoyed whenever you wipe in a key and then faster to leave. Now, I think that that's yet to be seen. I do think that the Challenger's Peril, makes sense. I do have a bigger complaint about checkpoints just in general than them changing the death timer, though. I think that the checkpoints of the dungeons have by and large not been spectacular. I think that they could go with a one-size-fits-all approach to checkpoints and just give you one after every single boss. But in general, it's like I think the Challenger's Peril is fine. And then at the plus 12 affix level, starting at Keystone level plus 12, a new affix will place the bargain affixes. At this level, Xal'atath will revoke her bargain and instead empower the dungeon creatures with 20% increase in health and damage. It says Xal'atath's Guile. Xal'atath betrays her players, revoking her bargain and increasing the health and damage of enemies by 20%. Meaning that you're going to have Fortified and Tyrannical and Guile on keys at plus 12 and higher. So because they didn't necessarily state this, but Fortified and Tyrannical will now serve as milestone affixes to alternate between Keystone levels 4 and 10 on a weekly rotation. So what they mean when they say this is Fortified a +4 affix will rotate. So 1 week it will start as Fortified, and the next week it will be Tyrannical, and the next week it will be Fortified again, and next week it will be Tyrannical again. And then on the +10 level, it will be the alternate affix. So if the +4 was Fortified, the +10 will be Tyrannical, and these will alternate weekly. And so if you're doing a 10, you're going to have both Fortified and Tyrannical on your affix sheet. And then if you do a 12, you're also going to have Guile. So you're going to have a bunch of modifiers for the mobs themselves, but you're not going to even have things such as like Bargain or Frenzied at the Xal'atath's seasonal affixes. Instead, you're just going to be pushing Keystone levels. And so that's what Blizzard was stating whenever they were saying that they were trying to reduce the mechanical complexity and completely remove push weeks, and that they're basically doing that by having very little variance on a week-to-week basis. And that does definitely solve the push week phenomenon. Here's an example of what Keystones will look like under this new model. +2 through +11 will have the following affixes. Bargain affix on a weekly rotation. +4 is Fortified or Tyrannical being active, alternating on a weekly rotation. Challenger's Peril will be active on all Keystones at a +7 level. +10 will be Tyrannical and Fortified are active, basically adding the alternate of which one was active on the +4. And then from Keystone level 12 and up, the Keystones will have the following affixes: Fortified, Challenger's Peril, Tyrannical, and then Xal'atath's Guile, which will replace the Bargain. Score is going to be changed. We believe that these changes, along with our Heroic and Mythic Dungeon changes, provide players with ways to engage with the dungeons in a setting they prefer. This is a fresh look at M+, and we look forward to your feedback. Because score is going to have to be changed, because score previous seasons was based off Tyrannical and Fortified score. I don't know what they're going to do. There might be Tyrannical and Fortified score. Oh gosh, because you're going to have Tyrannical and Fortified even at +10. I don't know. They might just have one score now, where it's just one. Like, it doesn't matter what. You don't have to play 2 separate weeks. You're just going to have to play 1 week, and you're going to be able to get full score. It's kind of what I expect. So, without further ado, I had a chance to catch up with Terathal and kind of and him and I kind of talked about this, had a back and forth for about 10 minutes to discuss what we actually thought about how this has changed the landscape of M+, since we did have the opportunity to test these dungeons and these affixes this week a bit thoroughly. All right, I'm joined by Terathal, rank 1 Preservation Evoker player, rank 1 AUG player, played Vengeance Demon Hunter as well, notorious title holder, played a bunch of beta keys this weekend. Is that safe to say?
Sounds about right.
Okay, so as somebody who's actually been able to test all of the Bargain affixes and just being able to thoroughly test the entire new system, what are your snap thoughts with these changes that we've actually seen?
Well, so they added a bunch of new things in the game, right? So they took away all the affixes, which I think is good. I think the dungeons themselves have enough friction where you don't need additional tasks to do on top of the dungeons themselves. And then I think the affixes themselves are pretty fun. So if you're sub 10 right now, there's some balls that spawn. You kill the balls, you get big haste.
Yeah.
And I think that generally that's a pretty good way of designing the system. Kill something, get rewarded for it, makes you do big damn. That's pretty fun outside of like Prideful.
The other one's
a pretty good system.
The other one, Frenzied, where the mobs are below, I don't even know what it is, 30% health, they take 20% bonus damage. I feel like I actually don't even notice it whenever it happens, aside from the fact that I see that they're raged on their bar.
Yeah, I don't really either. It's kind of an issue right now because beta is bugged and that affix is on keys that it's not supposed to be on, so it's kind of hard to tell. But yeah, it doesn't seem too impactful.
In general, I think that the Frenzied and the Ascended, I've equated these almost like seasonal level affixes. They are very, very in depth, I think, with the mechanical complexity that we're seeing. I guess my main concern would be what happens if you run out of CC, but I guess this is the advantage of it only being on below 12 keys, right? Like you in theory shouldn't run out of CC whenever you're doing a 12. You should be able to have enough CC to be able to stop all these mobs, yeah?
Yeah, I would think so. And that's actually, it's good that it stops at that level because recasting is actually a major issue right now. Specifically, there are some dungeons that stand out like Grim Batol where, all of the mobs cast on players instead of the tank. and you used to just throw a leg sweep in there, and that would stop until your kick came back up, and that's just not the case anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like you can go through a set of CCs and get your buff, and it's not problematic under a 10 level.
Okay, so Fortified and Tyrannical being on the Keystones. I think that this was maybe a bit controversial for some people, especially whenever you have the Guile, because they talk about like dungeons scaling out of control. I don't think we've necessarily been able to do that high level of keys on beta because you're only scaled even up to even on the highest level keys, you're only scaled to like 613 item level, which is like M0 gear-ish, maybe a little bit higher. So it's like really hard to test like high keys. But I mean, what's your snap reaction for Fortified plus Tyrannical plus Guile?
I think it kind of cancels out. I think having Tyran and Fort on the key is essentially the same thing as having neither. You will notice a higher jump in between like an 11 and 12 key. But after that, I mean, you just act as if the key is harder than it was before. Some of the bosses are really obvious. The first boss of Mist comes to mind. You're still fighting a tree for 7 minutes, and that still is a real thing. But I think it's good because at least Blizzard can tune around it now.
Mm-hmm. I think that's
more obvious.
I will say I think that the unifying tuning principles where it's like, oh, they need to make sure that these mobs are a little bit easier. Like Yalnu, I think would be Yalnu from last season, like the Everbloom final boss. I think it's going to be the exact same final boss if they don't tune it at all, regardless, right? So this is just one of those things that like they're not going to get bailed out by Tyrannical versus Fortified anymore. Instead, it's like they're going to have to be super diligent about making sure that the bosses or the trash are just like tuned really well at a baseline.
Yeah, and it seems like they're really far away from getting everything right. Like last week, Dawnbreaker was just a nightmare, and then you and I went in yesterday, and it was a joke. Grim Patrol was really chill.
I wouldn't classify it as a joke. Hold on, let's
well, it was a joke. It was a joke, and now it's not. Now it's ridiculous. Now everything one shots you, and it's a nightmare right now. So it's up for tuning at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think that beta cycles in general are the best time for tuning of the game. It's normally like the mid expansion stuff where you're like kind of hoping that tuning is going to happen, that it actually happens a lot less. Whereas right now, it seems like Blizzard's full focus is making sure that the affixes work properly and making sure that the dungeons are tuned for the first season. But then they have 2 months to do it, as opposed to in the past. What do you think about the Guile actually removing the bargain affixes and instead now you just increases the player health and damage of enemies done by 20%. So I've actually seen some people be like, I actually wish I had the bargain on the Keystones.
I don't know if the bargain specifically is good enough for like a seasonal affix. I hear a lot of people call it a seasonal affix, but I do generally agree there should be a seasonal affix on the key that keeps it refreshing from week to week. But I think of more like encrypted, something that opens up routing decisions. Even tormenting, not that I agree exactly with how tormenting worked, but I like that there were mini bosses that rotated around each week.
Sure.
That at least gave you like a little bit of variety, but it's not something that, every single week there's huge swings in the affixes, and some weeks feel good, some weeks feel bad. I do think there's probably going to be like a mid-season to late season period where everything gets pretty stale.
I do kind of worry about that. I've seen some people make that comment where they're like a bit worried that we're going to get more burned out because you're able to play every single week at the same capacity. Whereas before you actually kind of paced yourself due to the fact that, some weeks just kind of sucked. I don't know. I think that this is just kind of one of those things that I'm willing to kind of take the bad with the good, because it does allow you to play basically whenever you want, as opposed to the bolstering phenomenon where I'm taking a week off because it's bolstering.
Yeah, I think it's better than what we had, but I do miss seasonals. Even with the last system, I miss seasonals. I think seasonals are good and they bring people back to the game.
Yeah, I will say though, the nice thing about the bargain is that it like involves Xal'atath, and it feels like it's part of like the actual scope of the game, as opposed to which is kind of what they did with seasonals, right, in the past, where it was like infested mobs or prideful or Thundering had Razgeth talking to you. At least this, we have like Xal'atath talking to us, right?
Yeah, and most people will be doing like 9 keys, right, for your vault. Mm-hmm. I don't know if they've announced any kind of changes there, but I think most people will spend most of their time interacting with the system, and the affix is fun. So
yeah. Any final thoughts on the system as a whole? Do you think that it solved the goal that they were trying to deal with, where they were like, making sure that all players had something to work towards and high end. Do you think this is going to resolve the issue where high end players are just constantly bitching about the system?
Well, it depends if there's a chasm between key levels.
Okay.
I think that's another thing that is a real possibility. You might have a situation where people, there's a clear difference on live between 3,400 players and 3,600 players, but in this new system, in this new scaling, it's very possible that all of those players just end up like in a 16 key range, right? And then if you're 3,600 to like 3,800, you might end up in the 17 key range. And so there might be this situation where, the jumps are pretty extreme and it's kind of harder to tell, who's playing at what level in between key systems. And for competitive players, we like to be able to see that difference.
Yeah.
It's just another data point that we like. So I guess that's kind of a final concern.
Okay, but outside of that, you think the system? I think the system is drastically improved. I think that the removal of Sanguine Bolstering, Raging Bursting is just massive win. Thank God those are gone. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Cool. Thank you so much, Terathal, for joining and giving us your thoughts on it. Any final comments?
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
All right. Goodbye. Cool. It's always great to catch up with Terathal. Really great insight from him as to what we're actually seeing with the M Plus system as a whole. And that's going to be it for us this weekend. That's going to be it for us today in today's video. Make sure to catch back in for next week's video and the weekly news recap. And we will see you guys next week. Goodbye.